Hello, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Discourse and Magic. My name is Jonah Babbins, and in this episode, we sit down with Doc Dixon. If you've been in magic for a while, then you definitely know the name Doc Dixon. He is a creator, he is a thinker, and he is a performer and a worker. He's been on Penn and Teller's Fool Us twice, fooled them once, and you've probably seen him at a convention. You've seen something that he has come up with. And in this episode, we learn about kind of what he loves to do. We talk about being a worker, we talk about writing, we talk about creating magic, and so much more. I think you're going to love the episode. I know I did. Here it is, a wonderful conversation with the one and only Doc Dixon. Doc Dixon, how are you?
Hey, good to be here, at least, virtually together.
Guys, I am so pumped to have Doc here. I'm so pumped to have you here because not only is your Fool Us performances absolutely amazing, but if you watch them, there's something that happens when a magician watches somebody whose act is like clockwork. You realize that they are a worker. You realize you see inside of a joke. You see the 1,000 hours in it. You just see it, right? You see it. And that was, of all the things, that was what made me want to speak up and chat with you, is watching those two performances and just seeing like, this guy is a professional. You know what I mean? And I'm really excited to kind of dive into that and talk about like being a pro in magic and what it means to have a great act and perfect, like a trick that was perfectly executed from start to finish, and would love to really pump to chat about that. Does that make sense?
You're being so nice. I think this is going to be a very one-sided podcast. You just continue this line of thought. I like where this is going. This is good.
Let me say it another way.
I want to point out, we're going to get to me in a second, but I'm friends with both you and Ben on Facebook. And because I just want to crack the code on the discourse and magic thing here, okay? You post stuff like this, like very business, or how many of you are exploring this in your business and getting this? Please raise your hands or respond, effortless power, something like that. Ben puts stuff like this. How do you get squirrel hair out of a waffle iron? Asking for a friend. Is Ben pulling his weight?
He uploaded a video the other day of him drinking yogurt through his nose. like this is what I live with. No, here's what it is. When I do two things with my life, I run the Toronto Magic Company and I run, the Discourse and Magic podcast with the coaching and all that. Ben does two things with his life. He runs the Toronto Magic Company and then he does a bunch of other random stuff like get squirrel hair out of a waffle iron and other things like that. So we both run the Toronto Magic Company, but then in my spare time, I, do this. And in his spare time, I don't know what he does, chases squirrels or finds loose dogs or something. I don't know. Right now I don't know where he is. I don't know. I don't tend to worry about it. Anyways, I am so excited to have you here. I'm so excited to chat all about Fool Us, chat about comedy, chat about performing, chat about the pivot in and now out of virtual. But first things first, let's talk about you. How are you? How are things?
It's good. It's good. I'm glad we're, pivoting out of where we were pivoted into, and happy, joy, trying to cross all the T's and dot the I's as far as, health and safety and all that jazz. We're at the same time, very happy, very enthusiastic about it. Let's do this,
100%. And I'll just share, I'm very happy we got a chance to work together inside of Upgrade Academy, sort of the pivot into virtual. And I'd love to hear about kind of, first of all, how did you handle just in general overall virtual magic as somebody who's been like a live performer forever? And then we're going to kind of go back to the beginning. But how was the whole virtual hump for you?
Okay. First, I think it mirrored a lot of people, denial. This is going to all open up by the summer, and I've had conversations with other magician friends who are all like, yeah, that's what a lot of us thought. No, didn't happen. And then how to pivot from that. And I don't, how to pivot into the virtual. And I don't think everyone had the same pivot. A lot of us, because their client base, I mean, I think, and that maybe they had one client and boom, they got a lot of work from them. I think a lot of cruise ship guys were in that boat. I'm the danger of not having a lot of land work and that cruise ship client disappears. Boom. So when I eventually made the pivot, first, I think, again, the path that most people did a few free shows, not so much to get the kinks out of the material, but to get the kinks out of the tech and that feel. And then, learning how to market these, because it just wasn't the process of marketing them I had to catch up on, but who was buying them now? There were people buying virtual stuff that weren't buying it before, had no need, or weren't buying shows before. They're now buying virtual. As far as show content, the big breakthrough for me came, and I think this was a change in the Zoom tech, when you can spotlight more than one person.
Yep.
That was boom. That was, this is starting to feel like the previous era of in-person shows. In that, a lot of my work is crowd work. Yeah. Not like, hey, where you from? Not that kind of cliched thing. But we're going to go off on a lot of tangents here. Years back, I was working in Vernon's Symphony of the Rings, trying to work that into my stand-up show. Never got into the show, but I realized something as I was working on it. 90+% of what I say in my act is said directly to a specific audience member, and then the rest of the audience watches the exchange. It's not I'm addressing the audience in mass. There's a fair amount of that, but a big chunk is us watching the interaction. So when that ability came up on Zoom to spotlight them and spotlight me, okay, this is easy pickings. Someone's sitting at their couch, man and a woman, and because of their lighting, the guy is in the shadows.
Exactly.
Where the bit I'm going to go. I said, and your name? Oh, hi, Mary. And the gentleman mysteriously lurking in the dark next to you. Is everything okay?
Exactly.
It's a laugh that is, you can almost, it seems like an ad lib, but it's planned spontaneity.
Yeah. I mean, everybody who listens to this knows that I'm like bullish on virtual shows. I think they're awesome and fun. And I think one aspect of it that I'm obsessed with is exactly what you just said, which is in an in-person live show, I look out into an audience and most of the time I literally can't even see anything. It's just lights in my face. So I can't see anything. But even if I can, it's just a person nicely sitting there, with their hands by their lap, smiling or laughing at the jokes or whatever. In virtual, I can see your kids, I can see your dog, I can see the art on the wall, I can guess what neighborhood you live in. That gives me so much ammunition for my crowd work and for my engagement to actually hit. That it's so much fun. It is so much fun.
And not only that, in a live in-person setting, typically the rest of the audience just sees the backs of their heads. Mm-hmm. Virtually, they see the object they get of the joke that you're making.
Yes.
They get the punch immediately. And that's so important. There's no delay in it. Okay. Another tangent. It's like I used to do a stage trick where someone would find a card and I would fail to find it. My failure card always had to be dramatically different than the card.
Of course,
they picked the two of hearts. I would actually force
Queen of Spades
to fail. Yes. Because if they pick the two of hearts and the card at random comes up the two of diamonds, it's still wrong. But in that moment of them squinting, what they get it right, the joke's diffused.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like what we have going on in the in-person. You have to adjust it so the joke's not diffused. So you're not, what he said was, so you're not doing mental or comedy by proxy.
Yeah.
In virtual, they see it.
So look, there's a lot of advantages to virtual. I'm glad that you enjoyed it and found some fun ways to have fun with every aspect of it. Let's rewind. Maybe we'll drive the train all the way back to virtual, but let's rewind all the way back to kind of when you got started. How did you even get started in magic?
Typical, amateur magician's handbook. I mean, I had like the kids' books, when I was younger, but when I was 10 or 12, I got the amateur magician's handbook. And, that's one of the few books back then and this would have been in the 70s, where you could buy at a normal public bookstore, but still had some teeth to it, to lodge in. So I got that. And also when I was 10, and I tell this story on my show, Mom wanted to see the movie The Sting. Dad didn't want to go and Mom didn't want to go alone. So she took me to see it. And this would have been like 73, 74. And, I look back and I laugh because if you remember the movie, I mean, yeah, it's about con men, but there's also some stuff little kids shouldn't be seeing. I mean, a lady gets a bullet shot right to the forehead. The movie opens in put it delicately, a house of ill repute, so it's not really a 10-year-old movie. I mean, it was rated PG, but I see the card cheating scene in it and kind of fall in love with that romance of it. So I had that, and that's that, a few other books is all I had until I was about 18. And then started, I guess 18, 19, 20, going to the Cuckoo's Nest, which is the magic shop in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, no longer there, though they do have an online presence where they're selling some stuff, but wonderful people to work there in my 20s. I think I was there about 10 years as a demonstrator, but started doing it for a living in early 20s.
Let's talk about that kind of demonstrator period. I'm very lucky to have done all of these interviews, and anybody who has listened to all of these episodes, thank you. But also you have also probably recognized some patterns in people's stories of not getting into magic, but into getting good at magic. And there's a small list of things that magicians usually do that early on that ends up making them really good. One of them is to be overworked and underpaid. But, another one of them is to be in the restaurant industry for 7 years. But then another one of them, which you hear time and time again, is I demoed for 5 years behind the counter at so-and-so's. I demoed for 7 years behind the counter at this place. And demoing at a magic store is not something that I've ever done, but it's something that every time I hear it, it's one of those like, it's a master class. It's a curriculum. You get to learn how everything works. You have to learn how to actually perform in a way that is entertaining for people who walk into a magic store, right? It's not about the art of it all, right? Like it's about the entertainment of it all. No one's going to buy the thing if it's poetic. They're going to buy the thing if it is entertaining and if they feel that they can use it and do it and it's practical. So there's something really awesome that happens when you spend 10 years, 7 years working and demoing at a magic store. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. I would add to that. One of the lessons you learn is that tricks that after you've been in magic a few years, like, that's lame. Once you've sold Svengali decks and see people's eyes bug out, you realize, hey, maybe there's some underappreciated gems here. And not that, specifically I'm doing a Svengali deck in my act. No, I'm not doing that. But
you should. They're great. It's underappreciated. They are. Yeah, underappreciated gem.
It is great. One-way forcing decks. Thank you. You do that, and it just makes you realize, wow, this is great magic. And what you're so right about being artsy. I mean, no, just be a little funny, but bang out the trick. And let him see, wow, this is the wonder of it. This is just, great magic. The residual effect of a lot of the packet tricks from the 70s where, if it's not something in your regular repertoire, okay, can I do an Elmsley count now? Does the last card go underneath or on? It's a fun experience. And the Cuckoo's Nest, great shop, fun shop. Guy walks in, and this is less a magic thing and more of a customer management thing. He comes in and he said, he's looking at stuff on the shelves, and he says, let me show you something. And I had a silk I was using to demo, 9-inch silk, and he takes it from me and goes, watch. And he's doing like the standard thumb tip vanish with it. He looks at me and goes, you ever seen this? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Or, okay, here's a humbling thing. Guy comes in and I just won some magic contest and I demo a Svengali deck for the guy and I finish it up and, what do you think kind of thing? And he says, yeah, I have one of those. I just wanted to see if you were any good. It's a Svengali deck,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so keep me going on the journey. So you worked at the shop, and then,
and that was like 1 or 2 days a week, so far from full time.
So what else were you doing?
I was doing restaurant magic. I started out as a close-up guy, and then early on, I like a lot of things, a gig fell into my lap at the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. And so I was doing shows there 4 days a week, and I'd never really done a lot of kids magic. I never was a silly kind of kids magician thing, but I found I had a kind of an affinity for just the character work with them, Yeah. And that led to doing a lot of school programs in the 80s, early mid 90s, started in comedy clubs. I mean, you ever talk to people who've had a very planned out career path? I'm like that opposite guy, things came up and I can do that. Oh, when I first started out, I'm like 21, 22 years old. I did a lot of shows for city parks. And anybody has ever done any of these, we all have the horror stories to share where doing the show and your setup had to be very quick because they would drop you in basically in the middle of anywhere. And they were cheap shows, no money, but I was like, it was starting. I didn't have they were probably cheap shows and I was overpaid.
Right.
There's also a petting zoo there. And here's the important part, an unfenced in petting zoo.
Nice. So just loose animals.
Basically, yeah, or poorly fenced in. And I'm doing my show, which is kind of a close-up show, and this piglet comes around my feet. It's like 30 plus years ago. This piglet's around my feet and I'm my head, maybe the only person ever had to think this. When does a nudge with your foot become a kick? Because I don't want to kick the piglet, because that would be mean and the crowd would turn. But at the same time, I want it out of it. Yeah, so fun things like that. So, and then, is into the 90s and our current century, the comedy clubs, and then more corporate work. I did about 10 years of my Ren Fest, which just fell into because my wife and I got married in late 99 and we lived less than 10, 15 minutes from the Ren Fest. So I did that for almost a 10-year stretch in that market. So.
Was there any doubt about you being a professional magician, or was it just like, did it just happen instantly? You just said, I'm doing this.
Yeah, there wasn't much doubt. There wasn't any doubts in it. Part of it, I'm pretty optimistic person. So yeah, not a whole lot of doubts.
One thing that is clear when you see your magic is that you have got it down pat. You're a worker. You've got the jokes, you've got the moments, you've got everything in the right spot. Is there a philosophy or is there something that took you towards having it so sharp in the sense of, it doesn't seem like you're ad-libbing very much. It seems like you're doing your act with the jokes that you have hammered out with a decade's worth of experience. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, you've seen me on the 2 spots on Fool Us. Keep in mind, both of those 5-minute slots, particularly that first one, were hyper rehearsed.
Of course.
There had to be no room for error. I mean, in that, particularly the first one, essentially I'm manipulating that small cork P, which, isn't Richard Turner level of sleight of hand manip. At the same time, it's very binary. If the P goes where I don't want it to go in any segment of that routine, it tanks.
Right.
So the muscle memory more than ever on that. And there were a few spots in that set. One, probably most magicians caught, when Teller, through no fault of his own, totally understandable, picked up the cup early. That didn't rattle me at all. I will tell you the thing that took me a little while. I did a joke before the second sequence with the shells. The joke was, I said, okay, the audience misses were the P's on the first round. I go, okay, it wasn't your fault. It was the choices you had. They're all empty and identical. It's like voting.
Oh, yeah.
Do that joke. Now, I wrote that, I think a couple weeks before the show, because one, it's a practice I do. I'll look at a script for the act, for the show, and I'll highlight where I think the jokes are. Do it in either, if it's print, with a green highlighter, Google Docs, whatever.
When you say where the jokes are, you mean the sentences that are funny or where the laughs need to go?
Where the laughs are, where I know they will be.
Okay.
I'm fairly convicted they will be.
Yeah.
If it's material I've done before, then it's where I know.
Yeah.
And I looked at that spot and I go, I need a laugh there. I need something there to carry the momentum. So I do that joke. Now, I also know, like myself, both Penn and Teller have a libertarian footing. They're in that world. And so I do that, and boom, you can't really tell on TV, but man, did that laughter pop from them.
You gave them the double props for that one.
The fist bump, especially Teller. And Teller's laugh, not that it's odd or anything, but because the man spent 40 plus years being quiet, suddenly I hear his laugh. And I tell you, it threw me for like this half a second. I'm like, holy crap, that's loud,
Let's talk about the comedy for a second. What's your stance on comedy and magic? This term comedy magician is a term that I think a lot of magicians use, a lot of magicians throw around, and I think they're referring to, I am not a serious magician, so therefore I am, by process of elimination, a comedy magician. Sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not, and like even myself, when our clients ask on the phone, they're like, what kind of magic is it? Like, I explain it as comedy magic. I do jokes and magic. Would I bill myself as a comedy magician, like go to a comedy club? I don't know. I don't know that I could compete jokes per minute to comedians in a comedy club. But in terms of how I might describe my magic to somebody, like, I'm not a mentalist. I'm not a serious. I'm a comedy magician. I do silly jokes and I do like silly tricks, So that's how I describe myself, even though I may not be a comedy magician. So can you talk a little bit about comedy magic?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's just what I naturally gravitate to. I probably have, if I'm very honest with myself, maybe some of it is the security that comes from the laugh. Mm-hmm. You get the laugh, well, you've done good. It's that's good.
It's unequivocal entertainment, beyond what the trick is, right? Like,
Yeah, and it's not funny unless they laugh. Right. And I say that because sometimes people say things that are witty or clever. And I'm saying, when I say sometimes people, I mean, hey, me too. I'm not far from Mount Olympus over here. They're funny or clever, or they're clever or witty, but aren't delivering the yucks. And that's just a matter of putting the work in, and
let me give you a concrete example, or let me give you a concrete question. So when you were referring to that act, you said you came up with that joke a week before. I imagine you've been doing that trick for a decade, if I was to just take a gamble. For me, like, if I come with a joke a week before, like, I don't think it's going to be a joke that is going to be like mic drop centerpiece a joke, but more a better point to that is rather that I don't know that I would have the confidence in a joke that I wrote a week before. So I would love to hear about your process of writing. If there's any advice you can have, I know it's like such a stupid loaded question to ask about how do you make a joke, how do you make things funny, like a stupid question. But when you're looking at a joke, when you're looking at what you're writing, is there something that goes through your mind that you think is a little bit different?
I knew in that specific situation, the terrain of the joke was what was going on. I mean, with the props, in that, a stand-up comic, he can make jokes about whatever he wants to talk about. But dealing with the trick, unless the jokes feel like this odd non sequitur, they have to somehow link to the process, to the props that I'm using at the time. Now, here's the challenge. Walnut shells and cork peas are pretty much comedically inert.
Right.
What do you say? Hey, walnuts. I mean, hey, you look crazy about walnuts? What? There's nothing there. And so now it becomes, okay, the choices, okay, they're making the choice. They didn't get the choice right the first time. Okay, there's something there. And I can't tell you, I wish I could. I can tell you that I had a stack of notepads and blah, 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 blah. I wrote. And no, it stewed around in my head for a long time. I mean, I put it in a few weeks beforehand, but the joke was stewing before that. And as far as, having the confidence to know it was funny, I had a couple things going for me. One, age your audience, Penn and Teller. Right. I knew they would plug into that,
right?
Just from the background that I know. Like if you're doing, a corporate gig and you do a little background on whatever the profession is.
Exactly.
You got your easy pickings there. I knew that. And plus, formulaically, the delivery of, hey, these are your choices were empty and identical. And then head up, deadpan to the camera. It's like voting. That shift,
right?
Just know that shift in tone is almost like, we're going to put up the light, laugh, people.
Yeah.
It's formulaic, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But formulaic, not so much that it was predictable.
Let's talk about the writing aspect. I think a couple times in referring to the performance, you've referred to, writing, looking at the moments in the script, and I know that you also have a blog, so you are familiar to writing. You've published, lots of material. And I think that there are many different ways to go about building a script. And this is a conversation that we've referred to a lot in the podcast. And I think that, one of the ways that I build a script is my script exists after it has existed in the real world. So I go and I do it, and then I go write a script, and then I have a script from the thing that it was that I made, and now we can slowly work on this amorphous thing. Now this script, I can now go ahead and work on it. So I'd love to kind of break down, of the writing process, there's two. There's, how the script actually gets to the paper, and then there's the working on it. So I'd love to first talk about the first part. So are you somebody who sits down and writes out your trick and then says the lines you wrote? Or are you somebody that goes and does the trick and then, takes note of what you did?
When I first put something on the boards, something to keep in mind, I'm a big believer that it's not the number of tricks you do, but it is the time you have on stage. Like, got a comedy club gig coming up in June. The owner is not going to care how many tricks I do. He is going to care that I do my 45.
Yeah.
So if I've done a trick, it's been in my act for, say, 10 years, whatever. The first year of doing that trick is going to be, say, 4 or 5 minutes. I'm arbitrarily picking numbers. But then as I do it, and I keep doing that same good trick in front of an audience, it's going to be like a boat getting barnacles stuck on it.
It swells and swells and swells.
Yes. And so that's why it pays to, stick with good magic. You stay with that good magic. You stick with it, and the writing process is really just going to be a series of good ad libs. And, which is why, it's so much easier now. You put your phone in your pocket, press record, boom. You don't have to remember to write down the line. Even we're talking earlier about people in the room and the guys dimly lit, in the Zoom show. Having those things which the audience will give you credit for virtuosic wit. Oh, he just made that up, Marge. No, that situation's been here a million times. And, I'm doing it. I'm doing the joke because you gave me the setup. So that, the writing, I do like to write, or what's the line? I forget who said it. It's a semi-famous quote. I don't like writing, but I like having written. What you get from that, it tends to trim the fat. Unlike this conversation we're having now, where I'm meandering like a confused mountain goat, looking for shrubbery. This is scripted.
Well, but so where in this process, it sounds like, when you go and you try something, it's sort of loose and you're trying it for the first time. And then as you keep doing it, you're adding different ad libs. Where's the writing for you in that process?
Let me interject something about that, about getting something new on the boards. When I get a new trick, I'm like, okay, I've hopefully wisely picked a good trick, so I got that. A trick that fits me. That's good. I've tossed in a few lines that I hope will make funny. But how do I make sure that this isn't dead weight in the show? Well, first, I know it's going to be shorter because it's new. Then what I like to do is cannibalize a line from another routine that I've done that I know is funny. I've done it enough to know it's funny. And I can fit it into this new routine, which will give it a wave to ride across comedically until I've done it enough times that its own stuff comes. Its own bits of business, to use one of my favorite old timer terms, bits of business, that stuff comes from. So
what a great recipe there, which is, you always hear the advice of like, take something new and sandwich it between two old reliable things. But I think what you just said is even better, which is go borrow one of the lines or even maybe one of the premises or one of the, whatever, just something that has legs to it to get the trick out there. And then the trick itself will start, getting its own legs and getting its own jokes and presentations and bits that kind of grow out of it. I love that. One thing that I noticed that happens is there's the putting out process. Then there's kind of what you expressed as the tentacle process or I said the swelling. And then there comes a time where you have something that is this swollen, weird mess of a thing that was once a 5 minute, but now is a 13-minute like bit fest. And then you have to take it and shrink it almost back down to its 6 minutes. And then it becomes like fiery good because then it's only the best jokes and only the best bits and only the best everything. Do you find that?
Yeah. I think that none of these processes happen by themselves. They all happen together. So it's like it gets bigger as it gets smaller. You want to take the dead weight out. Something when you originally said that, I thought you were going to go to one of the cruelest things to happen for a comedic bit. And I can still remember when one of the first times it happened to me. I was like 30 plus years ago. When a bit kills the first time and then it perpetually
gets worse.
Stinks up the room. Oh, because what you do, or at least what I did, was I spent several performances chasing this ghost of performance past. Oh, that was so funny before. Nothing. bupkis, and you still have that memory of this huge laugh when, the planets aligned. Yeah. Oh, brutal.
I love it.
Some of the toughest stuff I think to write about, and I blog a little about this in my magician site, Dixon Magic, and that is tricks with a lot of process to them. One off the top of my head, say Zen envelopes, cards across.
Yeah.
There's a lot of steps in that to which you can attach funny, interactions, you can attach funny. Then look at another trick, the vanishing bird cage, the like a la Blackstone, the one.
Yeah.
You bring the cage out and it vanishes. Wow.
It's a half a second.
Yeah, it happens. Boom. And so I haven't done it in a while. I'm going to be reintroducing into the show, but I remember when I wrote the jokes for it, the challenge was the jokes are all about getting attention on this cage that's in it. And there's no interaction. It just, boom, it happens. Now, there can be if you do the repeat. I wasn't doing the repeat back then, where they put their hands around. Yeah, it's challenging. That's what we're paying for.
It's funny that you say that because I think in my magic, I gravitate towards not necessarily process heavy tricks, but tricks that have tension, that have suspense instead of surprise, because I think that I can have way more jokes in something that has more process to it, has more juice, has more meat to what has to be done. There's a whole bunch of more things to comment on. I want to talk about something that you and I mentioned a little bit before, but we mentioned again in here, which is this idea of self-deception. A performer can lie to themselves and tell them that their jokes are funny. They can lie to themselves and tell them that their tricks are good. They can even go as far as, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of this, but go as far as doing a pass and blinking when the pass happens, on that moment. So there's a lot of ways that performers can lie to themselves. Can you talk a little bit about self-deception and what people can look out for?
Well, comedically, it's pretty easy. Try to keep it objective. Did they laugh? Mm-hmm. If they did not laugh, it is not funny. It's, that's pretty easy. Deception, were they fooled? That's a little tougher because the audience isn't homogenous. They're not always thinking with the same mind. And so, I remember hearing stories of guys doing card warp for engineers, and they just, because of the way engineers visualize things, they just, there's a tear. And I got it, but the funny thing is a little easier to navigate. Did they laugh?
Right.
I wish I had a more profound answer, but as far as self-deception,
doesn't need to be.
They didn't laugh. It might have been clever, witty, unusual, nifty, but it wasn't measurably funny. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the craft of magic. One thing that we spoke about before we started recording is this idea of an art or a craft. And I think something you said was interesting, which is calling it a craft keeps you from getting lazy, right? That you actually have to work on, you not that calling it an art doesn't, but that you have to work on it to, if it doesn't work, you have to do something to make it work, that you are constantly crafting and working on it. Can you talk a little bit about this? I know a lot of magicians spend a lot of time worrying about whether magic is an art or not. I'd love to know what you think.
I guess part of it is I know my own abilities for self-deception, and to BS myself. And I don't want that to happen. So when you look at things as a craft, it just, does it work? If you're a plumber, does the faucet leak? Does the leak? Does the water come out when it's supposed to come out? A very, very kind of a meat and potatoes approach to it. Did they laugh? Now, I'm not saying abandon looking at it artistically. I think that's important, but I think focusing on art it is like a potential quicksand of pretentiousness. You know, things can work artistically. I like to think my act is pretty character driven.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the art to it, but I'd rather think about making it character driven and consistent as opposed to having the goal being art, you know, or what it was an Our Magic event commented about the artiste
Mm-hmm.
and how pretentious that can be. I just, you know, like both my spots on Fool Us, my goal was to do good magic. In the first one, I thought that, and forgive me, I don't want to sound pretentious here, but I thought it helped advance the plot a little, having the piece signed and ending up in the walnut, because is my understanding, most shell games end with the, I'll cover it up with the cup, push it forward, and it's now these two P's. In other words, you've upped the conditions. And I wanted to take it a different way. And in the second one, actually, that was the second one with the signed finger. That's the first thing I ever thought about getting on Fool Us, that piece.
Funny.
Just getting that on the boards in a way, because that gag with having somebody sign my actual finger, I've done that like 20 plus years. But it was finding a trick that it worked with, that made sense, that just wasn't a gag. But yeah, just want to do good work, you know? I don't know. Yeah, that's it. I just want to do solid work.
Let's talk a little bit about character. I think that when people see you on stage, they see a lot of things. They see your outfit, they see your image, they see your mustache, and those are, I can imagine, by design. Can you talk a little bit about this character that you have been forming, this Doc Dixon character that has been forming, that steps on stage every time you go out there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that evolves. You know, as was said on the first episode, the Doc thing came from, I was an EMT in high school, and nickname kind of stuck, and it fits the character. There's also a bit of a branding thing in there, and that it's memorable. The mustache thing fell into it by accident about, I guess 10 years ago now. I says, I'm gonna wax my stash. You know, let's see what it looks like. And I noticed it was at a gig I was doing. It was a close-up gig. It was outdoors. I was with this client, you know, many days during the summer, where I had to stop people. And I noticed this. They'd see it, and for whatever reason, it just caught people. You know, it's like my face, it makes it permanently smile even when I'm ticked off, you know.
Oh, that's funny.
And just that visual. I also think societally it went on at a time when the whole, there were a lot of this, you know, people doing up their beards and mustaches. And I don't know if that's as trendy now, but still like doing it. The character thing, you know, one thing I think about a performing character is it helps if you can age with it. Thankfully, I never tried to look like, hey, I'm a stud. Hello, ladies. You know, watch the wind go through my hair. You know, I'm not selling that. So I can age into what this character is.
I love that.
You know, and there was a bit more of it in the second performance, because my goal for that, and neither of those like, I'm going to fool them. No, good magic was to get the more comedic side of me on that stage.
I love that. I think that your approach of just put something out there that is going to be good magic is a great approach. And those are really, really phenomenal Fool Us performances that are funny and entertaining and really, really great magic. You know, one of the things that we spoke about earlier on in this is we spoke about some of the different venues that you have performed in. And you have now, and I'm adding Zoom to the venue list, you have now performed in a myriad of venues, close-up stage, comedy, you know, Zoom shows, events, Is there a favorite? Is there a style or a space or a group that you like the best or like the most?
Oh, great question. One of my heroes in magic was Harry Anderson. I think definitely one of, and maybe the only magician to achieve his level of fame with an act that fit in a satchel. And to me, kind of romantically, in the literary sense of that word, romantically, that is what magic is. One of my favorite books, House of Cards, Paul Rossini, he did that kind of act. To me, that is quintessential magicdom. That is what I love. So a club date, a banquet date where there's a few hundred people there. I walk up with my prop case. I have a satchel-like, I guess, set on the table. Boom, I'm ready to go. And there's enough in there. This will take off any jugglers that should listen to your podcast. 90 plus minutes that fits in a carry-on that can entertain several hundred. At the beginning of all of this, a juggler friend of mine posted, what are you looking forward most when things open up again, show-wise? And I said, entertaining intoxicated people in smoke-filled rooms. And, she was like, smoke-filled? I go, well, it's a metaphor. It's a vibe where, the front row is 2 feet away, love that.
In this conversation, we have spoken about comedy, we've spoken about performing, we've spoken about a ton of different things. And the elephant in the room with I know your eyes perked up. You're like, what could it be? With a giant bookshelf behind you is magic, is sleight of hand. And I think that one interesting thing is that a lot of magicians realize, myself included, myself especially, that you do not need all of that sleight of hand that, I spent years learning to be able to entertain the crowd. And, we were joking earlier about that Svengali deck, but you go and give someone funny and entertaining a Svengali deck and let that compete against a bottom deal every single day of the week. The bottom deal guy will lose. But there are magicians who, to great, amazing success, still in their professional act are using plenty of sleight of hand. And you are one of them. You are one of them that does not shy away from difficulty, even to this day. And I will honestly share for myself, as I perform more and more, the level of difficulty of the sleight of hand that I do just goes down, because I'm doing the minimum. No, but I'm being honest. Like when I used to sit around and just
you're being smarter.
When I used to sit around and practice a million, different things, it was just for the fun of it. But now I know almost the least possible. So I would love to hear about kind of how sleight of hand even still plays a role in not only your time, but also like why it plays such a big role in your magic when you could just as easily get away with not doing it.
Okay. Well, one, it's how I got into it. I got into it close-up magic. I think when I first started working at the magic shop, I didn't know how to do a professor's nightmare in my 20s, but I could do a classic pass. So, that somewhat odd, convoluted path. Also, in stage performance, there's one piece I do that is pretty sleight heavy, and that is a piece that Denny Haney, the dearly missed and much beloved Denny Haney, talked about it's in his book, but it's also that Scott Alexander wonderfully produced and wrote. It was in his lecture notes, where to put a skill piece in an act. And I had this skill piece, which I did early on in the act, back in the 90s, mid 90s, and it wasn't getting what I thought. And then I read and talked with Denny about it, and I started putting it later in the act. And what it did was, now the audience, and this is kind of Denny's thoughts, not mine. The audience liked me at that point. They knew me. And so now the skill piece went from that guy showing off to, wow, this is our friend who could do some cool stuff, So it's important to me from that. Oddly enough, I was on the phone with a client yesterday who saw me do this piece in a TV spot I did. And essentially what it is, I'm doing Memdex stuff. and I'm throwing every slight I have to do, passes, pink accounts, whatever, boom, you get that where their name card where it needs to be. Well, he says to me, hey, looking forward to our gig. It's coming up. He says, hey, I was tooling around on YouTube and I saw that spot you did. And, I was thinking, I'm paying you good money for this. You think you could tell me how you did that?
Oh my goodness.
And I said, well, I could explain it in 10 minutes and you can learn it in 10 years. So, but I think it has value. And of course, then in close-up magic, well, it opens up a whole world of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I wish, every time I look at my bookshelf, I have this feeling of, man, I should be a lot better. And it's humbling. The 40 books make us all cry.
I agree. Well, not me. I use them just to prop up my monitor when it needs to be a little higher.
They're multi-purposable.
Yeah. They're really good. They're really effective. No, I'm just kidding. Well, first of all, I disagree. I think you're phenomenal. But I want to use this opportunity to thank you and thank everybody. And even though the episode is not over, we have a few wrap-up questions. So some questions that we ask each and every guest before the podcast wraps up. So the first of which is the endless chain. So in order to keep the podcast going on for eternity, each guest is asked to recommend another guest that would be a phenomenal part of the show. So who would be an amazing guest for a conversation like this?
Charlie Fry.
Charlie Fry. That's a phenomenal one. And he's been uploading just amazing videos.
It's not, the volume of it.
Yeah.
And the quantity. I mean,
it's exactly the volume and quality is really what's so impressive.
And the original nature, or he'll take something, a prop that, we have on our own shelf. And it's like, he does something with it that's, not only, he's great at magic. He's this great juggler. He's this great artist. I don't know him, but I also understand he's a wonderfully kind person. He's got to be a serial killer. That has to be it. To have all that awesomeness.
I love that.
My lawyer requires me to say that's just a joke. Wait, even if he is, I say it's okay.
We still love him.
We still love him. He could be. That's how awesome he is. We can find, what are all these bodies? Hey, let it slide.
But did you see those videos? They're awesome. The next question is about modern magic. What's one thing you like about modern magic and one thing you don't like about modern magic?
Back when I was a kid, there was some stuff, if you had to learn, it was almost, if you wanted to learn, it was almost like, psst, you got to know somebody.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And while there's still an element of that in magic, it has shrunk so much. Mm-hmm. So it's so much easier to learn. Now, there's a couple prices to pay for that. One, you got to pay for the information, and two, you have to wade through and push aside the lousy information. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what I really like about modern magic.
What don't you like?
And the other part was what I don't like. Without naming names, I don't like. I hate the. This isn't an exposure rant. This is the fast buck through exposure by people who are already really talented. And why are you doing that? An artless exposure. Because now they can make money through YouTube hits. And that makes me sad because they're not inventing a trick of their own and exposing it. They're taking the labor from someone else. Mm-hmm. And that's sad. That's sad. I mean, remember when the Masked Magician came, well, I know this is a long time ago now, when he came out, all I could picture in my head was this guy who just spent $2,000 on a zigzag a week before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I mean, I'm sure there's other stuff, but yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
The next thing is the take-home point. People have been listening to us talk about magic for a while now. What is one thing, if they were to think back to this episode, remember one thing, what's the most important thing? What thing would you like people to think back when they think about this episode?
If you want to have a piece that's really good, you don't have to keep looking for new magic. Take that piece you've been doing a long time and focus on it and work it. And like we talked about, it's going to expand the jokes, the comedy, the bits. It's going to expand while it gets smaller in some weird, wonderful way. So you're going to take out the dead weight in it and you're going to put on new stuff on it.
I love that. The last thing is the plugs. Where can people find you on the internet? Where can magicians find? We haven't even talked about it, but you got magic products and lecture notes and wonderful things galore. Where can magicians find your stuff online?
DixonMagic.com, DIXON magic.com. I am due for another blog post, so I better get to work on that. I have several things in the pipeline of both a written and product nature. I think the best thing to do, subscribe to the newsletter. It's free.
Yep.
And you get the heads up. And while you can read the blog post without subscribing to the newsletter, first of all, that's the wrong thing to do.
But it's also tough to guess when it happens.
It's also tough to guess when it happens. And secondly, there are some things that I tip in kind of a password protected way, which you can get in the emails.
Well, there you have it. I hope you liked the episode, and I hope, of course, that you learned something. As always, if this was meaningful to you, if there was something cool in this to you, and you wanted to share it and tell a friend, it means the world, so please do. That's number one. And number two is if you kind of liked what you saw here, if you want to know about working together with me, I got a chance to work together with Doc, and I would love to work with you. So if that's kind of interesting to you, then go to discourseinmagic.com/upgrade and learn more about what working together looks like. Other than that, thanks for being here, and I'll see you all next Thursday. Peace!